Hello, welcome, chess players. This is a quick lesson for beginners. If you're not a beginner, this might not be for you. I'm going to beat a chess bot, hopefully beat a 700 rated chess bot. So this is generally going to be someone's first or second playing, especially if it's a younger person that's learning. It will take some more time to learn, but let's get started. So what I'm going to do is teach everything I can think of so that you can be prepared to beat your next opponent. So with the pawn, remember it can move two squares on its very first turn. After that, the pawn can only move one turn at a time. Okay, now black decided to move the what's called the A pawn because this is the A file, and then the B file and the C file and so forth. That's how you can refer to each square on the board. Is be like A1, A2, A3. Now you don't have to remember all this. I'm going to talk a little fast, but I promise you're going to pick up a lot of things here. All right. So keep in mind, black is not trying to control the center, which means they're not opening very well here. They're starting out a little weak. What you want to do, like I did, is start fighting for these center squares. So because the bot is rated lower, it doesn't really know that. So let's keep fighting for the control. Also putting pressure on the F7 king's pawn there, which I could maybe bring my knight over here to G5 and do a double attack on that square. Never as easy as you hope. They could simply lift this pawn, blocking this bishop's access. But this is about piece development. You're not trying to take a Hail Mary shot at a plan. You're trying to put your pieces, arrange them in a way that if your opponent makes the best move that they have, your plan still continues to progress, and you eventually take over the center and make trades that are good for you and bad. Right there, I just decided to castle, which means I moved the king two squares over, and the rook switched sides. This is something you can do once per game if you didn't remember that. Uh, Castling gives your king a little safer place. Instead of being here in the middle on the E file, you are over here on the side, and you've got your three pawns protecting the king. You've got a knight here to move around and help as well. If, let's say, they launch an attack on this H2 pawn, your knight's also protecting it, as well as your king. And you have a rook sort of protecting the F pawn. You may want to move it to E1 and strike down the center, but it's certainly there if you need it to move back. So the opponent finally made a move towards the center. Now, I see a possible attack here on their rook. If I move this D pawn out of the way, this bishop can now take the rook if they don't prevent it. So I get to develop a pawn off of its starting square into the center and attack this rook all in one move, which is a powerful move. You want to try to accomplish the most you can per move. So let's make that a double attack, bringing that pawn in the center and striking at the rook. Okay? And they did not defend against it, so we're going to take a piece that's worth 5 points and only lose 3-point bishop. The bishops are less valuable than the rook. All right. So we have now gained a 2-point advantage. If you look down here, I don't know if it's too hard to see. It says +2, which means I have a material advantage. You can still lose with a material advantage. You may have heard the phrase queen sacrifice, where someone gives up their best piece but still wins the game. It's very possible. But in this position, they are positionally weaker than me, so it's not going to be a problem. All right, so they have their knight and pawn looking at these two squares, kind of defending them and attacking them. And the queen here has many options. You can move back, sideways, diagonal. And you're trying to look at all the controls and squares that their pieces are able to connect to and prevent, damage from getting done. How can I control the center of the board and develop my pieces. Another thing you want to do as you're getting the game in motion is you want to get your pieces off their starting square, especially not the pawns as much, but the knights and bishops and queen. You don't want to bring your queen out into the kind of in the middle of the board too early, because then you can get attacked a little bit too much. They can chase your queen around while they're developing their pieces, right? So let's just do a productive move, get our pieces off the starting squares. You don't want to move a piece twice in the opening unless you get really advanced. So let's just keep it simple. I'd say we can put our knight here on c3 or d2. How about, let's go knight d2, which connects the knights together. If you attack one knight, the other one's protecting it. And also, instead of, if I went knight c3, I'd be blocking this pawn. So that's not always ideal. Sometimes it's okay, but okay, they've chosen to attack the bishop. So what we could do is either defend the bishop by, I call my daughter, she's 4. I say, let's maybe run and hide. She understands that. She likes to play hide and seek. You could move the bishop, or you can attack the queen with your knight. You don't always have to defend your piece. You can attack the opponent's other piece. So just to teach you that concept, I'm going to do the knight instead. We're attacking the queen and ignoring this attack until after the queen attack is done. So that if they take the bishop, we could take the queen. Now, in some cases, doing that will have a greater advantage than it does here. So let's continue. Since the bishop's under attack, I'm going to have to move it again. So here's the question. Do we want to move the bishop back to defend it here, or do we want to move it to here? And I think what we want to do is go to e2. And the reason is, if we go to d3, we're limiting our queen's amount of squares she can contact and move to. A little bit different, a little bit more. But more importantly, if we go d3, they could possibly push their pawn down. And if they get the black pawn here on c4, this square right here, it would attack the bishop and the knight at the same time, so the pawn could fork us. Now, it's not necessarily going to happen easily because they still have to get past this pawn, but that's not always as hard as it looks. They could strike in the center with this pawn, distract this pawn, and then push. But the bottom line is, let's just keep nice principled chess and not give them tactics. So let's go to e2. All right? And they have opened up their bishop's abilities to come out on the board, and also taking a little bit of space up in the center. Because remember, pawns attack diagonal, so that's why you see me draw these diagonals, in case that was a question you had. Let's also keep in mind their queen is pointing at our king's pawn, h2. I don't like that because it makes it more dangerous. If we move our knight, then the king is the only piece protecting h2, and then they could go knight g4 and have a 2-against-1 attack on h2. Now, of course, if my knight is moved, I could take their knight with the bishop, but again, keep it principled. Don't give them rooms to build tactics and start controlling how you function. If you have to capture pieces and do all this and that, they're kind of controlling the way the game goes through forced moves. And forced moves are not ideal because you're essentially playing defense instead of offense. All right, so where do we go from here? Well, they have a decent pawn structure going. I think what I want to do, we want to get this queen off of this starting square now soon, and which would connect these rooks together. So if you attack one rook, the other one is there to take it. For example, if this pawn gets traded, and this pawn's traded, and these rooks are looking at each other. It's nice if they're connected. So if the black rook takes the white rook, I don't have to move my queen over here to take their rook. You don't want them controlling where your queen goes, so you don't want your queen babysitting minor pieces. That's another way of explaining connecting rooks. So let's get it going. Let's go. I don't want to move the queen just yet because I have a different idea real quick that might automatically move the queen. If we push this d pawn forward, challenging the center, and calculate the trades, they could take that pawn with the e pawn, excuse me, and then we could trade with our e pawn. They take with their c pawn, and that would invite my queen into the center instead of just bringing my queen forward one square. She can come out right into the middle, and then that would launch an attack on the rook. And this is sort of the thought process, if I were playing a game against an equal rated player, for example, I might sit here and calculate a lot deeper, like, okay, if my queen's on this square, the bishop comes out, and you start calculating further. But for basic chess and learning how to do this and how to think, I'm going to keep it simple, and let's just move. All right, and they've decided not to capture, so that's fine. They're bringing the pawn forward, which means that they might push this pawn further and attack my knight. I'm okay with that because I can bring my knight right into the center if this pawn moves, because then it's no longer controlling the d4 square. So let's keep the game in motion. I think I'm just going to bring my queen forward a little, just to get her sort of into the game a little more, pointing at some other options. And it's still not too far from an equal game because of the piece, the material trades. I don't want to capture their pawn, although that is an option, because that would, kind of help them develop the bishop a little bit. Maybe it gives them extra space to land the knight. So I'm going to ignore that. Let's go ahead and prevent their knight from landing here on g4. We don't want their knight too close to our king anyway. So, all right, now I'm going to move the c pawn, because if they take, gives me this the rook a little more wiggle room. So they move the bishop on b7, which means if they trade and I trade, there's still I'm still protecting that pawn pretty well. Let's take this pawn, which gives us the c file. So now the rook is fully in the game. It's got the entire file all to itself, and where I can start to build other types of strategies. And now it's paying off even more that we put this pawn on h3, because if the knight were to able land here, it could have a double attack on f2 pawn. And since we have this pawn here, it is not able to get away with that because we simply capture the knight. So how do we continue an offensive strike against them? I think they have a fairly reasonable defense going on. I mean, we can attack this pawn. I don't see too much weakness going on here. There's no piece on the board that they have that's unprotected. I can't attack this pawn because there's already two defending it. And you're just looking for weakness, right? Now, what if I push that pawn forward? They can capture my d pawn with the bishop or pawn. That's not a good move. If they move the bishop, I could put them in check. So they'd probably take with the e pawn instead of taking with the bishop. Let's go ahead and put the rook on e1, which if we capture the pawn, it would put their king in check. And we'll go ahead and keep it principled and move the bishop back to f1, which defends our king's pawns a little bit further. And okay, now we have a nice productive move here available. So if I push this e-pawn forward, it would attack the bishop. And if they were to then take this d-pawn we talked about with their e-pawn, we could capture the bishop. So they're most likely going to defend the bishop and move it back, which now gives us the ability, sorry, I got a message, that gives us the ability to either go forward or capture. And now this may get a little messy because they could capture this knight and damage the pawn structure I have by the king, but it's worth it because I want to teach you something. Right here, this is kind of called blocking them in. I'm going to move that pawn forward, which means their king is kind of trapped back here, but also they don't have a lot of flexibility. Their pawn is locked in place. This pawn is locked in place. If this pawn moves, I have the option to take it. And you start to narrow down how many moves they can actually make. And then we have to try to launch an attack or continue an attack that can profit. And I just thought of something, by the way. Oh, never mind. It wouldn't have worked. Oh yes, I did. I did miss a move here. When they moved the bishop here, that left their knight unprotected. I just caught that. But you got to try to spot those things when you're playing in the game, because the entire structure of a piece can collapse by one mistake. All right, so that knight is not exactly dangerous right now. It could become a headache, but I think we can. Let's get our knight into the game a little further. Maybe we can go. Excuse me. Maybe we can go h7 and then knight f6 check, and actually that would force possibly the queen to have to sacrifice herself to. Oh, okay. So there we go. If I put the king in check now, the king has to move that way. Doesn't necessarily help unless I have a nice follow-up move. I like it though because let's watch how this goes. If my queen is here and I move the knight, the king gets put into check while I move the knight, so I can maybe do some kind of tactic here, a combination. So let's look at that. If knight goes d5, queen puts him in check. He can block the check, but he would be taken by my pawn, so he won't likely block the check. He'll either move back to e8 or he'll go to c8. If he goes to c8, I can check him again, which forks the queen and king. So that would be very good. So I don't think he would do that. Let's suppose he does the best move and goes back to e8. Oh, then I can fork him that way. So it looks like we have ourselves a nice queen. Let's check this out. And boom. Oh, and the game ended. I didn't even have to do it. Which, of course, if you're playing a slower game, you can look that over more and see that before it happened. But I was looking at this fork, and obviously the king can't go anywhere now because it's trapped and it's in check. So I hope that was insightful for you. Playing against a 700, and again, I've played over 20 years, and This is how to think about the game and get your pieces in motion, build a plan, look for weakness, look for forks, look for tactics, and execute. So I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you in the next video.